Hello and welcome to Annie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Cursed Painting. Holly Arnold stepped into an old, musty antique shop nestled along the narrow cobbled streets of the Isle of Wight. She had always been drawn to forgotten treasures, mysterious relics with hidden histories. But today a sense of dread weighed on the air, thick and heavy, pressing down on her as she explored the shop's dimly lit interior. Behind a cracked glass cabinet, Holly spotted it. A painting of a woman so beautiful it seemed she would step out of the frame at any moment. Her eyes, a piercing shade of green, glimmered with something unfathomable, sorrow, anger, a touch of malice, perhaps. The woman wore a gown of deep crimson that shimmered against her pale skin, her dark hair cascading in delicate waves over her shoulders. Tagged beneath the frame read "The Lady in Red." Holly felt her heart thud as she approached the painting, her gaze fixed on the woman's expression, which seemed to change as she drew nearer. The woman's face went from serene to something more sinister, almost as if warning Holly to stay away. But Holly's curiosity had already overpowered her caution. Despite the cold feeling gnawing at her stomach, she bought the painting on impulse, enchanted by the haunting beauty of the Lady in Red. That evening, Holly hung the painting in her living room, directly opposite the old fireplace. She poured herself a glass of wine, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction, as though she had uncovered a hidden gem. But as the night deepened, a chilling unease settled over her. Shadows twisted and stretched, and an uncanny draught rattled through her small cottage despite the windows being tightly shut. It began innocently enough. Holly would catch glimpses of movement from the corner of her eye, always from the painting. At first, she convinced herself it was her imagination, a trick of the flickering firelight. But each time she looked away, she swore she could see the woman's gaze shift, following her across the room. Unable to shake the feeling, Holly moved closer to the painting. She peered into the woman's eyes, searching for something, some explanation, maybe. And then, as if in response, the woman's painted lips twisted into a faint, mocking smile. Holly stumbled back, her pulse racing. "Impossible," she whispered. But the horror had only just begun. Over the following days, Holly's life descended into a waking nightmare. Her phone would ring in the dead of night, but no one would speak on the other end. Her once quiet cottage filled with an overwhelming sense of malice, as though something was watching her every move. And every night the woman's expression would change, her smile growing wider, her eyes colder, filled with an insatiable hunger. One night Holly woke to a faint rustling sound, like fabric dragging across the floor. Her bedroom door was open, a chill seeping in. She sat up, her heart hammering, and her gaze drifted toward the painting down the hallway. In the darkness she could just make out the woman in red, who seemed closer now, as though the figure had shifted within the frame. Terrified, Holly scrambled out of bed, grabbing a flashlight. The beam flickered as she moved toward the painting. Her mind raced, every instinct screaming to get rid of the cursed object, to burn it, to throw it into the sea. She raised the flashlight, casting its weak glow on the woman's face. That's when she saw it. Thin trails of red trickled from the woman's eyes, down her cheeks like blood-streaked tears. The woman's smile was gone, replaced by an expression of sheer rage. As Holly stared, paralyzed, the air grew heavy, and a faint whisper drifted toward her, seeping into her ears like poison. "Why did you take me?" Holly staggered back, dropping the flashlight, but the voice continued, louder now. "They all took me, and they all paid." The words were sharp, venomous. Holly backed away, her breath quickening, but the voice grew louder, clawing its way into her mind. The woman's story unfolded in horrifying fragments. She had been betrayed, scorned by a lover who had painted her portrait only to leave her in ruin. Her spirit had been bound to the canvas, forever seeking vengeance on those who dared possess her likeness. By morning, Holly had lost all sense of time. She hadn't slept, her mind consumed by the woman's haunting voice. Her friends noticed the change in her, how pale and hollow-eyed she'd become, but Holly couldn't tell them. She could feel the woman's spirit watching, always waiting. One day, unable to bear the weight of the curse any longer, Holly took the painting and drove to the cliffs overlooking the sea. She knew what she had to do. She would end this, free herself from the woman's grasp once and for all. As she stood at the edge, holding the painting over the crashing waves below, the woman's face twisted in anger, her mouth open in a silent scream. The wind whipped around Holly, a forceful gust that almost pushed her forward. Summoning every ounce of strength, she hurled the painting over the edge. It spiraled down into the foaming sea, swallowed by the waves. Holly felt a moment of relief, a sudden release. But as she turned to leave, a soft whisper lingered in her ears. "I'll find you." She knew then that she could never escape. The curse had sunk its claws into her, an inescapable fate entwined with her soul. Days later, the painting was found washed up on the shore, pristine and intact, waiting for its next owner. And somewhere, beneath the rolling waves and storm-laden sky, the woman in red watched, waiting to continue her endless revenge. Holly couldn't shake the feeling that something dark still lingered. Though she had thrown the painting into the sea, the woman in red haunted her dreams, each vision more vivid, more relentless than the last. Holly would wake in the dead of night, gasping for breath, her body drenched in cold sweat, but the whisper still echoed in her mind, "I'll find you." Days passed in a haze, and Holly tried to move on, to convince herself it was over. But strange things began happening around her cottage. The smell of salt water and decaying seaweed permeated her home, clinging to her skin, her clothes, her hair. Sometimes she would find wet footprints trailing from her front door, leading to her bedroom, each step leaving a puddle of dark, briny water. One night, as she lay tossing in bed, a soft knock sounded at her front door. The clock read 3:00 a.m. Heart pounding, Holly stayed silent, praying it was just her imagination. But the knock came again, louder this time. With a trembling hand, she reached for her phone to call for help, but it was dead, the screen blank and lifeless. Slowly she rose, her feet moving as if drawn by some unseen force. She opened the front door to find no one there, only the blackness of the night and the roar of the distant sea. But just as she turned to close it, she spotted something on the ground. The painting. It lay propped against her doorstep, pristine and dry, as if it had never touched water at all. The woman's eyes stared up at Holly, her gaze sharper, her expression more furious than ever. Holly's stomach twisted with horror, but the compulsion to bring it inside overwhelmed her senses. She reached out, and the instant her fingers brushed the frame, her mind was flooded with flashes of the woman's life, a life filled with betrayal, anger, and vengeance. In a single, terrifying vision, Holly saw the woman in red in her final moments. She had been abandoned by her lover, left destitute and broken, her beauty the only thing people desired of her. Desperate and scorned, she turned to a painter, a man who claimed he would capture her essence in a portrait, preserve her spirit for eternity. But his promise had been twisted. He had trapped her in that canvas, cursing her to a life of imprisonment, unable to rest, unable to forget. As the visions faded, Holly stumbled back, gasping for breath, her head throbbing. She looked down at the painting, but this time the woman's face was different. Her expression was one of pleading, as though she were silently begging Holly to set her free. Desperation took over. Holly grabbed a knife from the kitchen and approached the painting with trembling hands. She slashed at the canvas, tearing through the woman's face, her figure, the deep red of her gown. But as the knife cut deeper, a scream filled the room, a scream so loud it reverberated off the walls, a scream filled with centuries of anger, of pain, of endless suffering. The sound grew deafening, and Holly dropped the knife, covering her ears. But it was no use, the scream only grew louder, until it felt like her skull would split open. The air grew colder, and the lights in her cottage flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the scream stopped. Silence filled the room, oppressive and thick. Holly looked down at the painting. It lay in tatters, the woman's image distorted, her once beautiful face twisted into a mask of rage. But the feeling of dread remained, heavier than ever. Holly knew, deep down, that destroying the painting hadn't freed the woman, it had only unleashed her wrath. From that moment, Holly was no longer alone. The woman in red haunted her every step, her presence lingering just out of sight. Holly would catch glimpses of her in mirrors, her green eyes gleaming with hatred. At night, she would feel the woman's icy breath against her skin, hear her voice whispering from the shadows, "You took me, you'll pay." Holly tried to flee, to escape the island, but the woman followed, relentless and unforgiving. No matter where she went, the woman in red was there, a silent, vengeful spectre. One night, after weeks of torment, Holly stood by the cliffs, looking out over the dark, endless sea. She could feel the woman's presence beside her, a cold hand resting on her shoulder. Holly knew there was only one way to end it, one way to find peace. With a final, shuddering breath, she stepped forward, letting the sea claim her. And somewhere, beneath the waves, the woman in red watched, her spirit unrelenting, her revenge complete. But her rage was endless, her thirst for vengeance insatiable. In time, the painting would wash ashore again, waiting for its next owner, its next victim, for the curse of the woman in red would never die. And neither would her wrath. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.